May?
It's him.
The day the floating world stopped falling, every alien sworn to the throne swore it was impossible, until they saw who restarted the dying power with nothing but breath and defiance. And if that sounds unbelievable, wait until you hear why the universe listened to a human. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, subscribe to help this world grow, and let's start the story. Jonah Marek had learned 3 rules for survival on Solmarith. Keep your head down, finish your work before anyone notices, and never, ever get close to the Lumina chamber. He was breaking the 3rd rule right now. The mop handle trembled slightly in his hands as he cleaned the marble corridor outside the chamber's sealed entrance. Through the crystalline walls, he could see the faint pulse of dying light, like a heartbeat struggling to continue. The archons, those massive gravitational crystals that kept the floating islands from plummeting into the endless ocean below, were supposed to glow with brilliant white radiance. Instead, they flickered like candles in a storm. A group of Solmarian aristocrats swept past him, their flowing robes brushing against his cleaning bucket. They didn't even glance down. To them, Jonah was furniture. Less than furniture, actually. Furniture at least had purpose. "Pathetic," one of them muttered, though whether about him or the dying crystals, Jonah couldn't tell. Probably both. He returned to scrubbing a floor that was already spotless. That was the thing about being a human on Solmarith. You had to work twice as hard to be considered half as useful. The other human workers called it the Marek method, though Jonah had never asked them to name it after him. He just wanted to send enough credits back to Earth to keep his sister in school. 3 more months, just 3 more months of invisible labor, and he could afford her tuition. The chamber doors opened with a sound like wind chimes, and Queen Alindra emerged, flanked by her advisors. Jonah immediately pressed himself against the wall, making himself as small as possible. But something made him glance up. She looked exhausted. The Queen's silver hair fell in elegant waves past her shoulders, and her eyes held that distinctive Solmarian luminescence, like captured starlight. But there were shadows beneath those eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she walked. How many times had she tried to reactivate the lumina of all now? 50. 60. "Your Majesty must try again tomorrow," Counselor Vex was saying, his tone dripping with false concern. "Perhaps if you meditate longer before the ritual." "I have meditated for hours, Vex." Alindra's voice was soft but strained. "The Lumina does not respond to meditation. It does not respond to anything." "Then perhaps your Majesty is not trying hard enough." Jonah saw her flinch at those words, and something hot flared in his chest. Not trying hard enough? She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Alindra noticed him then, her gaze falling on the human janitor pressed against the wall. Their eyes met for just a moment. Jonah expected disgust or dismissal, or that particular bland indifference the Solmarians specialized in. Instead, he saw something that looked almost like kinship. 2 people who felt invisible in a palace full of expectations. Then she was gone, swept away by her entourage, and Jonah was alone again with his mop and the dying light of the chamber. Except as he stood there, something strange happened. The archons inside the chamber pulsed just once, with slightly more intensity than before. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Jonah felt it in his bones, like a tuning fork resonating with a frequency only he could hear. He stepped closer to the crystalline wall, curiosity overriding caution. The moment his hand touched the surface, the pulse came again, stronger this time. The dying light flickered, reached toward him, then subsided. What the hell was that? Jonah pulled his hand back quickly, heart hammering. No one had seen. Good. He grabbed his bucket and mop, ready to flee to a safer part of the palace. That's when his foot caught on the uneven tile he'd been meaning to report for weeks. Time seemed to slow as Jonah pitched forward, his cleaning supplies flying from his hands. The bucket sailed through the air in a graceful arc. The mop spun like a javelin, and every single tool, brush, and bottle crashed through the chamber's partially open door, scattering across the sacred floor where only royalty was permitted to tread. The sound of metal and plastic clattering on marble echoed through the corridor like an alarm. Jonah stood frozen, staring at the disaster he'd just created, and thought, well, at least I won't have to worry about my sister's tuition anymore. They were definitely going to fire him, or worse. Jonah was on his hands and knees, frantically gathering his scattered tools, when he heard the footsteps returning. Multiple sets, fast. "Don't move, human." He looked up to find Queen Elindra standing in the chamber doorway, flanked by Counselor Vex and half a dozen palace guards. The Queen's luminescent eyes were wide, not with anger, but with something that looked like shock. "Your Majesty, I'm so sorry. I tripped. I didn't mean—" "Your name." Her voice cut through his babbling. "What is your name?" Jonah blinked. In 3 years of working at the palace, no one had ever asked his name. What? "Your name, human." There was an urgency in her tone now, almost desperate. "Tell me your name." "Jonah," he stammered, clutching a scrub brush to his chest like a shield. "Jonah Merrick!" The moment his full name left his lips, the world exploded with light. The archons, those ancient gravitational crystals that had been slowly dying for decades, suddenly blazed with brilliant white radiance. But it wasn't just light. The energy moved, rippled, bent toward Jonah, as if recognizing something. The crystals hummed with a frequency that made his teeth ache and his heart race. And then, impossibly, they bowed. Actually bowed, tilting on their axes toward the janitor kneeling on the sacred floor. Elindra gasped and dropped to her knees, one hand pressed to her chest. The Lumina Val, her ancestral power that had been dormant for so long, roared to life inside her, not responding to her commands but to him, to his name, to his presence. "Impossible!" Vex breathed, his face draining of color. "The Lumina only responds to royal blood, only to the Queen. This cannot be." Oh, but it was happening. The chamber filled with cascading light, patterns of energy swirling around Jonah like he was the eye of a storm he didn't understand. He tried to stand, to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. The power held him frozen. Not painfully, but firmly, like the universe itself wanted him to stay exactly where he was. "What's happening?" Jonah's voice cracked. "What did I do?" Elindra looked up at him, and for the first time since entering, she smiled. It was a small, bewildered smile, but genuine. "You woke it up," she whispered. "After 47 attempts, after years of failure, you just woke it up." The light began to fade, the archons settling back into their positions, but their glow remained steady and strong. The dying flicker was gone. In its place was a gentle, powerful radiance that hummed with life. Jonah finally managed to stand, his knees shaking. "I don't understand. I'm nobody. I'm just the janitor." "Apparently," Vex said coldly, recovering from his shock, "you are more than that. Guards, take him to the observation quarters. No one is to speak with him until we determine what has occurred here." "Wait," Elindra protested, rising to her feet. "He hasn't done anything wrong." "With respect, Your Majesty, we don't know what he's done." The Lumina Val responding to a human, to a common laborer? Vex's lip curled. This is either unprecedented heresy or dangerous manipulation. "We must investigate." As the guards moved to flank Jonah, a figure emerged from behind a pillar, a Solmarian with silver fingers that moved in rapid, fluid patterns. Kyle, the palace record-keeper, was deaf but brilliant, and his eyes were fixed on the energy patterns still shimmering faintly in the air. Kale's hands moved in sign language, too fast for Jonah to follow, but Elindra clearly understood. Her expression shifted from confusion to fascination. "Cal says the energy signature is unique," she translated. "Not manipulation, recognition." "Recognition of what?" Vex demanded. Kale signed again, his movements uncertain, questioning. Elindra's voice was soft when she spoke. "He doesn't know. But whatever the Lumina recognized in him, it's never recognized it before, not in centuries. Over the next hour, Counselor Vex tried everything. He brought in other humans from the maintenance crews, had them say their names in the chamber, even positioned them exactly where Jonah had stood. Nothing. The Archons remained steady but showed no special response. No bowing, no cascade of light. When they brought in Marcus, a human engineer who'd been on Solmarith for a decade, and nothing happened, Vex actually looked panicked. "Try again," he ordered. "Say your full name, human." Marcus Chen, the engineer repeated for the third time, glancing nervously at Jonah. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but whatever Marek did, I can't replicate it. Maybe you should just ask him." "We will determine what questions to ask," Vex snapped. Then, more quietly to Alindra, "Your Majesty, the situation is highly irregular. A human is the catalyst for your power. The people will never accept it. The Council will never accept it. We must find another explanation." "What if there is no other explanation?" Alindra asked, and Jonah heard something in her voice that surprised him. Not disgust. Hope. "Then we will make one," Vex said, and the way he looked at Jonah made the human's blood run cold. "Guards, take him to the sub-levels, confined quarters. He is to be observed but not harmed." Yet, as they led Jonah away, he glanced back once. Alindra was standing in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the steady glow of the Archons, looking more lost than any queen should ever look. Their eyes met across the distance, and Jonah saw her mouth 2 words. "I'm sorry." Then the doors closed, and he was alone with guards who wouldn't meet his eyes and a future that had just become terrifyingly uncertain. The sub-level quarters were not meant for imprisonment. They were storage rooms, really, converted into makeshift cells with a cot, a basin, and a small window that showed nothing but ocean. Jonah sat on the cot, head in his hands, trying to understand what had happened. The Lumina Val had responded to his name. Not to him exactly, but to the sound of it, like a lock recognizing its key. But that made no sense. He was human. The Solmarians had made it very clear in dozens of subtle and not-so-subtle ways that humans were temporary guests at best, tolerated labor at worst. His datapad buzzed. One message from his sister on Earth. "Did you send this month's payment? University is asking." Jonah's chest tightened. He'd been so close to making the transfer before all of this happened. Now he was locked in a basement with guards outside his door, and no way to access his account. Even if they didn't execute him for whatever they thought he'd done, they'd certainly fire him. No job meant no credits, meant his sister would have to drop out, all because he'd tripped over a tile. A sound made him look up. In the corner of the room, partially hidden by shadows, something glowed faintly. Jonah approached carefully and found a small Archon crystal, no bigger than his fist, sitting in a maintenance bracket. It was cracked down the middle, its light stuttering like a dying star. "You too, huh?" Jonah said to the crystal. "Broken and forgotten." He knelt beside it, examining the fracture. His supervisor had once shown him how to stabilize damaged Archons using resonance tools. It was delicate work, usually reserved for trained technicians, but Jonah had always been good with his hands. Before he'd been a janitor, he'd been an apprentice mechanic on Earth. That felt like a lifetime ago. "I'm not supposed to touch you," he told the crystal, aware he was talking to a rock and not caring. "Sacred artifacts, royal property, all that. But you know what? I'm already in trouble. Might as well be useful while I'm here." He found some basic tools in the maintenance kit they'd left in the room, probably overlooked in the rush to imprison him. Using a resonance tuner and steady pressure, Jonah began working on the crack, humming softly as he worked. It was an old Earth song his mother used to sing, something about stars and hope and finding your way home. The Archon responded, not dramatically, not like the ones in the chamber, but its light steadied. The crack didn't close, but the fracture stabilized, held together by careful adjustment and, Jonah liked to think, a little bit of care. "There you go," he whispered. "Still broken, but at least you're not falling apart." He set the crystal back in its bracket and sat back down on the cot. From his pocket, he pulled out a small piece of maintenance plastic and a knife, and began carving. It was a habit from Earth, something to keep his hands busy when his mind was too loud. He carved the shape of an island, complete with tiny buildings and delicate supports, a miniature of Velhara from memory. 3 floors above, Alindra paced her chambers, feeling the lumina vol inside her grow weaker with each passing hour. The burst of life it had experienced in the chamber was fading, like a fire losing its fuel. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the power's desperate pulse. It wanted him. The human. Jonah Merrick. "This is madness," she whispered to the empty room. "He's just a person. Just a man who cleans floors and fixes things and looked at her like she was human too. There had been no fear in his eyes when he'd knelt on the chamber floor, no ambition. Just confusion and worry, the expression of someone who wanted nothing more than to not cause trouble. When was the last time someone had looked at her without wanting something? A knock at her door. Counselor Vex entered without waiting for permission, his face grave. "Your Majesty, we have a problem. The Lumina Vol's output is decreasing again. The Archons are beginning to destabilize." Elindra closed her eyes. "How long?" "Days, perhaps. Maybe less." Vex moved closer, his voice dropping. "We need to discuss options." "Options?" "The human clearly has some connection to your power. An accident of resonance, perhaps, or a fluke of biology. But the people cannot know that a human, a laborer, is necessary for your power to function. It would undermine the entire foundation of our society." "So what do you suggest?" Alindra asked, though she feared she already knew. "We blame him. Publicly. Say he stole the power, manipulated it, that he's responsible for its instability. The people need a villain, Your Majesty. Better a human scapegoat than a queen who cannot fulfill her duty." "That's murder, Vex. You're talking about murdering an innocent man to save face." "I'm talking about saving a civilization." Vex's eyes were cold. "Sometimes the needs of the many require sacrifices. You know this." Elindra wanted to argue, to refuse, but the weight of her crown felt heavier than ever. Her people were dying because she couldn't control the power she'd been born to wield. If Jonah was somehow part of the solution, didn't she have a duty to figure out how? Even if it meant using him. But using and sacrificing were different things. "I need to speak with him," she said finally. "Absolutely not. Any contact between you could complicate—" "I need to speak with him, Vex." Her voice held royal authority now. "That's not a request." Vex bowed stiffly. "As you wish, Your Majesty. Though I feel compelled to note that the Council will not approve." "The Council doesn't have to approve. I do." She moved toward the door, then paused. "And Vex, if anything happens to that human without my explicit permission, I will personally ensure you are the one held responsible. Am I clear?" "Crystal, Your Majesty." As Elindra left her chambers, heading for the sublevels, the palace shuddered slightly. Just a tremor, barely noticeable, but she felt it in her bones. The islands were beginning to fall, and somewhere below, a human janitor had no idea he was about to become the center of a storm that would change everything. Kale found Elindra in the archives at midnight, which was where she always went when she couldn't sleep. Insomnia had plagued her for years, ever since the Lumina Vol began dying. Tonight was worse than usual. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the power slipping away, and with it, the weight of her failing responsibility. The record-keeper's silver fingers moved in rapid sign language, and Elindra read them easily after years of practice. "You want to see him," Kale signed. "The human." It wasn't a question. Kale had always been perceptive, able to read people as easily as he read his precious records. Vex forbade it. Elindra signed back, her own movements clumsy compared to his fluid grace. "Vex forbids many things. That doesn't make them wrong." Kale tilted his head, considering her. The energy patterns in the chamber were clear. Whatever the Lumina recognized in that human, it needs. You need. And you're curious. Elindra smiled despite herself. When did you become so bold? When I realized I was the only one willing to tell you the truth. His hands moved with gentle emphasis. Come, I know the guard schedules. There's a window. 20 minutes later, Elindra stood outside Jonah's door, her heart hammering. This was reckless. If Vex discovered she'd defied him, if the Council learned she was secretly visiting the human, it would fuel every conspiracy they were already crafting. But the pull she felt toward understanding what had happened in that chamber was stronger than fear. Kale picked the lock with practiced ease, making Elindra wonder how many archives he'd accessed without permission over the years. The door opened silently, and they slipped inside. Jonah was sitting on his cot, working on something small in his hands. He looked up, startled, then quickly stood when he recognized the Queen. The tiny object he'd been carving fell to the floor. Your Majesty, I didn't— Please sit, Elindra said softly. I'm not here officially. This is just a conversation between two people who are very confused. Jonah sat slowly, eyeing Kale with curiosity. The record keeper positioned himself by the door, a silent guardian. Elindra moved closer, her luminescent eyes taking in the small room. Are they treating you well? They're not treating me badly, Jonah said carefully. Just like I don't exist, which to be fair is how they've always treated me. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for a lot of things. She noticed the small carved island on the floor and picked it up. Did you make this? Old habit, helps me think. He paused. It's Velhara, your island. I probably got the proportions wrong. It's beautiful. She turned it over in her hands, marveling at the detail. You have an artist's eye. I have a janitor's patience. There's a difference. He smiled, and it transformed his tired face into something almost handsome. Why are you really here, Your Majesty? Elindra sat on the floor, her royal robes pooling around her in a way that would have horrified her attendants. Because I haven't slept properly in 3 years, and I want to understand what happened in that chamber. Because when you said your name, I felt my power wake up for the first time in decades, and I need to know why. And because— She hesitated. Because you looked at me like I was a person, not a crown. That doesn't happen often. Jonah was quiet for a moment. You want to know something funny? On Earth, I used to watch documentaries about Solmarith, the floating islands, the crystal cities, the elegant aliens with their perfect society. I thought it was paradise. Then I got here and realized paradise doesn't need janitors. Paradise doesn't exist, Elindra said. Just places with better marketing. He laughed, a genuine sound that made her smile. Can I ask you something personal? After I broke into your cell at midnight, I think we're past formality. Why can't you sleep? The question was so direct, so human, that Elindra almost didn't answer. But there was something about the darkness of the room and the understanding in his eyes that made honesty feel possible. Because every night, I feel the lumina dying a little more, and I know that when it finally goes, so does Solmarith, and everyone will know I failed. That I wasn't strong enough, wasn't worthy enough, wasn't enough. She wrapped her arms around herself. Every queen in my lineage could control the lumina, except me. So yes, sleep is difficult. That sounds exhausting, Jonah said quietly. It is. Want to hear something that might help? She looked at him surprised. What? A story from Earth. My sister used to have trouble sleeping, and I'd tell her stories until she drifted off. It's not much, but— He shrugged. It's what I have. Elindra found herself nodding. Okay. So Jonah told her about Earth. Not the formal histories or the political summaries, but small things. He told her about rain that fell from clouds instead of being controlled by crystals, about seasons that changed without regulation, about his sister who wanted to study xenobiology and kept sending him terrible jokes through messages. He told her about their mother, who died when they were young, and how she used to say that the universe was big enough for everyone to matter, even if they felt small. As he spoke, something strange happened outside the window. In the dark ocean below, small points of light began to appear. Not the harsh glow of technology, but soft organic luminescence, like stars blooming in deep water. They pulsed gently, in rhythm with Jonah's words, spreading across the surface in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Kale noticed first, tapping Elindra's shoulder and pointing. She turned, breath catching. "What are those?" Jonah asked, following their gaze. "I don't know," Elindra whispered. "I've never seen them before." The blooms of light grew brighter, more numerous, until the ocean beneath Velhara glowed like a galaxy. It was beautiful, inexplicable, and somehow Elindra knew with certainty it was connected to this moment, to this conversation, to the man sitting across from her telling stories about rain and sisters and mattering. "You didn't just wake up the Lumina," she said softly. "You're waking up something else, something old. Is that good or bad?" "I have no idea." She smiled. "But for the first time in years I feel awake, really awake. Not just going through motions, but alive." She met his eyes. "You didn't interrupt anything, Jonah Merrick. You woke me up." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights bloom in the ocean, until Kale's hands moved urgently. "Guards changing. We need to go." As Elindra moved to the door, Jonah called out softly, "Your Majesty, thank you for treating me like a person." "Thank you," she replied, "for reminding me I am one." The door closed behind them, and Jonah was alone again, but the room felt less empty now, and outside the blooms of light continued to glow, marking something that had shifted, changed, begun. 3 floors above, Counselor Vex stood at his window, watching those same lights with cold calculation, and when a guard reported that the Queen had been spotted in the sub-level corridor, he smiled. Perfect. Now he had all the justification he needed. The council meeting the next morning was tense. Vex had called it urgently, presenting evidence of Elindra's midnight visit with barely concealed satisfaction. "The Queen compromises the investigation," he declared, his voice carrying across the chamber. "She has developed an inappropriate attachment to the human, clouding her judgment. This cannot continue. What I have developed," Elindra said coldly, "is an interest in understanding why my ancestral power responds to him. That's not attachment. That's pragmatism." "Then let us be pragmatic, Your Majesty." Vex gestured to the windows, where the persistent blooms of light still glowed in the ocean. "These phenomena began when he arrived. The Lumina destabilizes in his absence. He has somehow inserted himself into your power. Is that not the definition of theft? Or connection?" Kale signed from his position at the record table. A translator spoke his words aloud. "The energy patterns suggest symbiosis, not theft. The Lumina recognizes him. That implies he belongs to the system, not that he's corrupting it." "A human belonging to our most sacred power?" another counselor scoffed. "That's heresy." "That's science," Elindra countered, "and I propose we test it. Properly. Bring Jonah to the chamber. Let me attempt to activate the Lumina with him present, under controlled conditions. If it works, we have our answer. If it doesn't, we'll know the previous event was an anomaly." The council erupted in arguments, but eventually Vex agreed. "Fine, but under strict supervision. And if this fails, Your Majesty, we proceed with more serious measures." The threat was clear. Elindra nodded. "Understood." An hour later, Jonah stood in the Lumina chamber again, surrounded by guards, counselors, and Elindra. The Archons glowed steadily, but showed no special reaction to his presence. "Your Majesty," Vex said formally, "whenever you're ready." Elindra approached the central crystal array, placing her hands on the ancient conduits. She closed her eyes, reaching for the Lumina Val within her, calling to the power that had been so unresponsive for so long. Nothing happened. She tried again, pushing harder, the way she'd done 47 times before. The Archons flickered but didn't respond. The lumina inside her pulsed weakly, like a dying heartbeat. "Perhaps," Vex said slowly, "if the human said his name?" Jonah glanced at Alindra, who nodded. "Jonah Marek," he said clearly. The archons blazed to life, that same cascading light as before, and the lumina roared awake inside Alindra. But it was reaching, straining, incomplete. She could feel the power wanting to bridge the gap between them, but something was missing. "It's not enough," she gasped. "It's like half of an equation." Jonah felt it too, that pull in his chest, like something inside him was responding to something inside her. On impulse, driven by instinct he didn't understand, he stepped closer. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. Alindra's eyes snapped open, meeting his. Understanding passed between them, unspoken. "Alindra Volmarin." "Alindra?" Jonah repeated, and something clicked. The lumina exploded outward, not violently, but like a flower blooming at impossible speed. The energy flowed from Alindra to Jonah and back again, creating a circuit, a loop, a connection that had never existed before. The archons didn't just glow, they sang, harmonizing with a frequency that made everyone in the room feel it in their bones. And for the first time in recorded history, the Lumina Vol manifested outside the Queen's body. Threads of silvery light wove between Alindra and Jonah, visible to everyone, binding them in a pattern that looked almost like shared breath. "Impossible," someone whispered. But it was happening. The power wasn't stolen. It was shared. Two people, two names, one system completing itself. Alindra laughed, the sound bright with relief and wonder. "Do you feel that?" "I feel everything," Jonah said, amazed. The connection showed him what she felt. The weight of responsibility, the fear of failure, the exhaustion of years carrying something too heavy alone. And through their bond, she felt him too. The quiet determination, the homesickness, the fierce love for his sister, the gentle strength that came from staying kind in a place that showed him no kindness. The palace shuddered, but this time with stability returning. The islands, which had been slowly sinking for hours, locked into position. The archons across all of Velhara synchronized, their glow steady and strong. "It's working," Kel signed frantically. "The entire island network is stabilizing." The counselors stared in shock. Some looked relieved. Others, like Vex, looked horrified. Alindra slowly pulled back, and the silvery threads faded. The connection remained, but dormant now, like a door they'd opened and could open again. She turned to the council, her expression defiant. "There's your answer. He's not stealing my power. He's completing it." "Completing it?" Vex's voice was strangled. "Your Majesty, do you understand what you're suggesting? That our ancestral power, passed down through royal bloodlines for millennia, requires a human, a janitor, to function? I understand that Solmarith is stable for the first time in decades," Alindra shot back. "I understand that the Lumina chose him, not the other way around. And I understand that we have a choice. Accept this reality or watch our world fall into the ocean." "There must be another explanation," a counselor protested. "A way to transfer whatever quality he possesses, to extract it." "Extract it?" Jonah's voice was quiet, but everyone heard it. "You mean kill me?" The silence that followed was damning. Vex recovered first. "Not kill. Study. Understand. For the good of Solmarith, surely you understand." "I understand you'd rather murder someone than admit you were wrong about humans," Jonah said flatly. "That's pretty clear. How dare you speak to the council?" "He has every right," Alindra interrupted. "Since apparently his existence is crucial to our survival. Or doesn't that grant him basic dignity?" The argument escalated, voices rising, until Vex slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! This changes nothing. Your Majesty, the people will never accept a human as integral to your power. The social structure of Solmarith depends on clear hierarchy. This connection undermines everything. It must be severed." "And how do you propose we do that?" Alindra demanded. Vex's smile was cold. "There are ways. The human can be removed, his connection to you terminated. We have experts who can ensure the Lumina transfers solely to you where it belongs. You're talking about execution. I'm talking about preservation of our society." Alindra looked at Jonah, saw the resignation in his eyes, the way he was already accepting what might come. That look, that quiet acceptance of injustice, made something inside her crack. "No," she said firmly. "I forbid it." "Muskek, Your Majesty," Vex said softly, "that's not your decision to make alone. The Council has authority in matters of planetary security, and we have determined that the human poses a risk. A public trial will be held tomorrow. The people deserve to know the truth." "What truth?" Alindra demanded. "That he saved us? That he manipulated you, stole sacred power, disrupted natural order?" Vex's eyes glinted. "Evidence will be presented. Judgment will be rendered. And Solmarith will be restored to proper balance." As the council dispersed, each member signing the decree, Jonah met Alindra's desperate gaze across the chamber. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't apologize. I'll fix this, I promise." But as guards led him away, and Alindra watched the ocean blooms slowly fade, she wondered if that was a promise she could keep. Because tomorrow, the council would convene, and Councillor Vex had already written the verdict. Kale had been searching the archives all night, and what he found made his hands shake as he signed. The restricted section, the one even he wasn't supposed to access without council permission, contained records from before the Great Forgetting, when Solmarith's history had been deliberately edited. Every civilization had its myths, its uncomfortable truths buried beneath official narratives. But this wasn't myth. This was documentation. He found Alindra in her chambers at dawn, still awake, staring at nothing. When he entered, her eyes were red. "I can't save him," she said, before Kale could sign anything. "The council won't budge. Vex has convinced them that executing Jonah is the only way to preserve order. They've scheduled it for sunset." Her voice cracked. "And the worst part is, I understand their fear. If people believe a human is necessary for my power, it changes everything. Every social structure, every belief, every assumption we've built our world on." Kale moved quickly, pulling out an ancient datapad, so old it used physical buttons instead of touch interface. He placed it in front of her and signed, "Read." Alindra looked down at the screen, and her breath caught. "The Valmarin Codex, Third Age, Entry 847, on the nature of the Lumina and its catalytic requirements. It has been determined through extensive research that the Lumina Vol, while manifesting in royal bloodlines, requires emotional anchoring to reach full potency. The anchor species currently identified as Earth-origin humans provide the necessary resonance frequency. Their capacity for emotional complexity, for simultaneous strength and vulnerability, creates a harmonic that completes the Lumina's function." She scrolled down, hands trembling. Entry 851. The Council has voted to remove humans from Solmarith. Though they serve as effective emotional anchors, their presence creates uncomfortable dependencies. The people must believe the Lumina is purely Solmerian, purely royal. Any evidence of human contribution will be erased from official record. Further down, dated hundreds of years later. Entry 1203. The Lumina continues to weaken. Queen Shalavera managed only brief activation before collapsing. Physicians find no physical cause. The royal line persists, but the power dims with each generation. Some scholars whisper of a missing component, but such theories are dismissed as heresy. Alindra looked up at Kale, horror and understanding dawning in her eyes. They knew. Our ancestors knew humans were necessary, and they erased them anyway. Out of pride. Kale signed, and the civilization nearly collapsed. The Third Age ended in chaos. The Fourth Age barely survived. Every generation since has struggled with the Lumina, never understanding why. "Because we removed the anchor." Alindra stood, pacing. We removed humans, buried the truth, and spent centuries weakening ourselves. And now one walks back into the chamber and accidentally reveals what we've been missing for. She checked the dates. 412 years. Another sign from Kale. The blooms in the ocean. I found references. They appear when an anchor successfully bonds with a lumina carrier. Physical manifestation of emotional connection. The old texts call them vanir. Proof of harmony. Elindra moved to the window, looking down at the ocean where the blooms still glowed faintly. This is what we lost, this connection, this harmony. We chose isolation over interdependence and called it strength. And now Vex wants to make the same choice again, Kyle signed. He doesn't know, Elindra said suddenly. The Council doesn't know about these records. If they did, they'd destroy them, Kyle interrupted, like their predecessors did. Pride is a powerful thing, Your Majesty, strong enough to kill worlds. A chime at the door. A messenger entered, breathless. Your Majesty, there's a situation. The human workers, they're attempting to flee the island. They're stealing a transport vessel. Elindra's heart sank. Of course they were. With Jonah's execution announced, every human on Solmarith had to know they could be next. Stop them, she ordered. Peacefully, no force. I'll speak with them. By the time she reached the docks, a crowd had gathered. 20 human workers stood by a transport ship, cargo loaded, fear evident in every face. Marcus Chen, the engineer who'd been tested in the chamber, stood at the front. Your Majesty, he said, voice steady despite his obvious fear. We're leaving, peacefully. We have enough fuel to reach the nearest trade station. We're not stealing the ship. We'll send payment once we can. But we're not staying somewhere that executes people for existing. I understand, Elindra said, and I don't blame you, but I'm asking you to wait, one day. Let me try to fix this. You can't fix it, a woman called out. They're going to kill Jonah because he made you look weak. What do you think they'll do to the rest of us? I know how it looks. Do you? Marcus stepped closer, not threatening but firm. With respect, Your Majesty, I don't think you do. Jonah is the best of us. Kind, quiet, never complained, never caused trouble. He sent every spare credit back to Earth to help his sister, and now he's going to die because your power likes him. If that's justice, then justice is broken. Elindra felt the words like physical blows. He was right. They were all right. The Lumen of All needs him, she said quietly. Not just tolerates him. Needs him. That's what the Council can't accept. Then let it fail, Marcus said. Let your power die, because it's not worth his life. Silence fell over the dock. Even the Solmarian guards looked uncomfortable. Elindra thought about what Kale had shown her. About 400 years of decline because of pride. About Jonah in that cell, carving miniatures and accepting death with quiet dignity. About how he'd looked at her like she was human too. You're right, she said finally. It's not worth his life. Nothing is. But the choice isn't between Jonah and the Lumina. It's between truth and comfortable lies. And I'm done with lies. She turned to the crowd, raising her voice so all could hear. The Lumen of All has been failing for centuries. Not because of some curse or failing in the royal line, but because we removed humans from the equation. Deliberately. Our ancestors knew humans were necessary, were partners in this power, and they erased you from history rather than share credit. She pulled out the datapad Kale had given her. I have proof. Documentation. The truth we've been hiding from ourselves. And what good does truth do Jonah? Marcus demanded. The execution is still happening. Not if I abdicate. The crowd gasped. Even Marcus looked shocked. If I renounce the throne, Elindra continued, I'm no longer bound by council law. I can't activate the Lumina, but I can stop them from using it as an excuse to kill anyone. Solmarith falls, but Jonah lives. That's the trade. Your Majesty, you can't. I can, and I will. Unless... She looked at the humans before her, Unless you help me save him, help me prove to the people that humans aren't the enemy, that the connection between us isn't weakness, but strength. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he turned to the other humans. Jonah convinced me to give Solmarith one more chance. Said running away just proves their prejudice right. I thought he was crazy, but maybe he was just braver than me. Or stupider, someone muttered, but there was fondness in it. He stays, we all might die, Marcus said to the group. We leave, we definitely live, but we leave him behind. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of leaving people behind. One by one, the humans nodded. Then we have until sunset, Elindra said, something fierce and hopeful rising in her chest. Kale, I need those records copied and broadcast. Vex is going to fight this, but I want the truth public before he can stop it. Marcus, gather your people. If we're going to change 400 years of history, we're going to need everyone. As the group dispersed, moving with sudden purpose, Elindra looked out at the ocean blooms, still glowing. Hold on, Jonah, she whispered. We're coming. But in the council chambers, Vex had just received word of Elindra's actions, and he was done being subtle. If she wouldn't protect Solmarith from itself, then he would, by any means necessary. The cell door opened at dawn, and Jonah knew immediately something was wrong. Too many guards, too formal. The lead officer wouldn't meet his eyes. It's time, the officer said simply. Jonah stood slowly, setting down the miniature he'd been working on. Another island, this one with tiny figures carved into it. He'd meant it as a gift for Elindra if he somehow survived. Now it would just be something left behind. Can I ask a favor? His voice was steady. There's a message on my datapad for my sister. Can someone make sure it sends? She'll worry if she doesn't hear from me. The officer's jaw tightened. I'll see to it personally. Thank you. They led him through corridors he'd cleaned 100 times, past aristocrats who turned away, uncomfortable with seeing the condemned walking among them. Jonah focused on breathing, on putting one foot in front of the other. He'd known this might happen the moment the Archons responded to his name. No good deed goes unpunished, his mother used to say. She'd been right. The public square was packed. Thousands of Solmarians come to witness justice, or what passed for it. A platform had been erected in the center with energy restraints instead of ropes. Very civilized, very efficient. As they guided him up the steps, Jonah saw her. Elindra stood with the council, her face pale, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles were white. She'd been crying. He could tell. He tried to smile at her, to tell her it was okay, but Vex stepped forward before he could. People of Solmarith, the counselor's voice rang out across the square. We gather today to witness the execution of a criminal. This human, Jonah Marek, stands accused of manipulation, theft of sacred power, and endangering our civilization. That's not true, someone shouted from the crowd. Marcus Chen, standing with a group of humans near the front. He didn't do anything wrong. The council has reviewed the evidence, Vex continued smoothly. The defendant's presence destabilizes our queen's power, creates dangerous anomalies, and threatens the natural order. For the safety of Solmarith, this sentence has been deemed necessary. Deemed by whom? Elindra's voice cut through the square. She stepped forward, her luminescent eyes blazing. The council? The same council that just discovered I have proof of historical records showing humans were always meant to be part of the Lumina system? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vex's expression hardened. Your Majesty, this is not the time. This is exactly the time. Elindra held up the ancient datapad. Our ancestors worked with humans, needed them, called them emotional anchors. And when pride made that uncomfortable, they erased the truth and doomed us to centuries of decline. Every weakening of the Lumina, every struggle I've had, was because we removed humans from the equation. Convenient, Vex said coldly, that you produce ancient records only when you've developed a personal attachment to one of them. How do we know these documents are real? How do we know you haven't been manipulated? Because they're in the restricted archives. Kyle stood beside Alindra, his signs translated by a public system. Sealed by the Council itself, 400 years ago. I can provide verification codes, I can show authentication. The truth exists, whether you want to accept it or not. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Confusion, doubt, anger. Vex played his final card. Even if such records exist, they prove my point. Humans are dangerous. They create dependencies. They make us weak. Perhaps our ancestors were right to remove them, even if their methods were questionable. He turned to the crowd. Would you rather be strong and independent, or forever chained to humans for your very survival? It was a masterful manipulation, and Jonah saw it working. The crowd's doubt shifted, crystallized into familiar prejudice. Of course, humans were the problem. Easy answer. Comfortable answer. I'll do it, Jonah said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. He took a breath, raised his voice. I'll accept the execution. If it stops all this, if it lets everyone move forward, then fine. I'm tired of being the problem. He looked at Alindra, trying to convey everything he couldn't say. Just promise me one thing. Be kinder to the next humans who come here. That's all I ask. Jonah, no. Alindra started forward, but Vex gestured and guards blocked her path. The human accepts his fate, Vex announced. Let it be done. They activated the energy restraints. Jonah felt the cold grip around his wrists, his chest. This was it. He closed his eyes, thinking of his sister, hoping she'd understand, hoping she'd forgive him for not coming home. The execution beam charged with a rising whine, and Alindra felt the lumina vol inside her scream. It wasn't a metaphor. The power actually screamed, a wail of agony that only she could hear, and then it died. Not slowly, not with dignity, but violently, tearing away from her like flesh being ripped. She collapsed, a cry torn from her throat, and bloodlight began seeping from her skin. The energy scars, the ones Jonah had felt when he'd touched her hand, they'd always been there, invisible marks from years of forcing a power that didn't want to be forced. Now they manifested visible to everyone, silvery wounds bleeding light across her arms, her neck, her face. Your Majesty! Kyle rushed to her side as she fell to her knees. The Lumina! She gasped. It's gone. Completely gone. It won't survive without him. I won't survive without him. The crowd erupted in panic, because everyone felt it. The archons across Velhara flickered, dimmed, began to fail. The island shuddered, losing altitude. Stop the execution! Someone screamed. But Vex didn't stop it. He stood frozen, face pale as he realized what was happening. The Lumina wasn't just connected to Jonah. It had bonded with him so completely that his death would mean its death. And without the Lumina, Somerith fell. Counselor, a guard shouted. The islands are dropping. Vex finally snapped into action. Abort! Abort the execution! But the beam was already charging, already locked. Alindra tried to stand, to run to Jonah, but her legs wouldn't hold her. The energy bleeding from her scars was her life force, the power desperately trying to reach its other half before both were destroyed. Please, she whispered, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the light blood. Please, not like this. Jonah opened his eyes, saw her broken on the ground, and felt his heart shatter. He'd thought his death would save them. Instead, it was killing her. Alindra, he said, and even with the execution beam charging, even with death seconds away, his voice was gentle. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. The platform trembled. The island dropped another meter. The ocean rose closer. And in that moment of absolute despair, with the execution beam about to fire and the world literally falling apart, Vex made his choice. Not the proud choice, not the political choice, the only choice left. Say her name, he commanded Jonah, voice breaking. Say her name now. But Jonah couldn't speak. The restraints were cutting off his air, the beam was too close, and everything was falling, falling, falling. Vex ran to the controls, disabling the execution, shouting orders that no one could hear over the chaos. The island tilted dangerously. People screamed, buildings groaned, and Elindra, bleeding light and losing consciousness, reached one hand toward Jonah across the impossible distance between them. "Don't leave me," she breathed. "Please. Don't leave me alone again." The archons went dark. The screaming stopped. And in the sudden, terrible silence, everyone understood. They were out of time. The fall lasted 3 heartbeats. 3 heartbeats of absolute terror, as Velhera dropped 30 meters in seconds, buildings cracking, the ocean surging upward, people thrown to the ground. Then the emergency archons, the backup systems, caught them. Barely. The island stabilized at a dangerous angle, groaning under the strain. But everyone knew those backups wouldn't hold for long. Vex released Jonah from the restraints with shaking hands, all pretense of control gone. "Reactivate it, both of you, now." But Elindra couldn't stand. The light bleeding from her scars had weakened her to the point of collapse. Kyle and 2 guards carried her toward Jonah, laying her gently on the tilted platform. Jonah dropped beside her, cupping her face. "I'm here. I'm here. I've got you." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused.
"Jonah? Say my name," he urged. "Please, we need to restart this." Jonah Merrick. Her voice was barely a whisper. Nothing happened. The Lumina had been damaged too badly, traumatized. It had felt them both dying and had shut down to protect itself. Another shudder. The island dropped another 5 meters. Screams erupted from the... "It's not working!" Vex shouted. "Why isn't it working?" "Because you traumatized it," Cal signed frantically, his translator barely keeping up.
"The Lumina is alive, conscious. It felt you trying to kill its anchor. It doesn't trust you." Marcus Chen pushed through the crowd, the other human workers behind him. "Then maybe it'll trust us. Jonah, what do you need?" Jonah looked at the humans gathered around him, at the Solmarians watching with fear and confusion, at Elindra bleeding light in his arms. "I need everyone to stop treating each other like enemies. I need truth. I need..." He laughed bitterly. "I need a miracle." "I can't give you a miracle," Marcus said, kneeling beside them, "but I can give you witnesses. We all can." He stood, facing the crowd. "You want truth? Here's truth. Jonah Merrick is the kindest person I've ever met. Human or alien. He worked double shifts so other people could rest. He fixed things no one else noticed were broken. He carved little sculptures and left them around the palace like gifts for anyone who needed something beautiful." Marcus's voice cracked. "And when we tried to run to save ourselves, he convinced us to stay. Said running just proves prejudice right. He believed Solmarith could be better than its worst impulses. He believed in you even when you gave him every reason not to." Another human spoke up, a woman named Sarah. "He used to tell us stories about his sister on Earth, how proud he was of her, how much he missed his home. But he never complained. Never acted like being here was beneath him, even when you treated him like he was invisible." "He fixed my son's toy," a Solmarian voice called out. Someone in the crowd, not nobility. "A little hover car that broke. Jonah spent an hour repairing it on his lunch break. Wouldn't accept payment. Just smiled and said everyone deserves something that works. He found my lost data crystal," another voice added. "Returned it without looking at the contents. It had private family recordings. He could have sold it or used it for leverage. He just gave it back." More voices joined. Small kindnesses, forgotten acts, the invisible labor of someone who'd treated everyone with dignity, even when receiving none in return. Kale pulled out his datapad, projecting the ancient records for everyone to see. 412 years ago, we erased humans from our history, called them emotional anchors. They were partners, not servants. We ended that partnership out of pride and have been slowly dying ever since. Every queen, every generation, struggling with a power that was incomplete. That's the truth we've been running from. The projection showed images from the old texts, Humans and Solmarians working together, the lumina manifesting between them in patterns of shared light. The Vanir blooms in the ocean, proof of harmony. Look at the ocean now, Kale signed, pointing to the waters below. The blooms returned when Jonah and Queen Elindra connected. After 400 years, the signs of true bonding came back. That's not theft. That's recognition. From the storage area near the platform, someone retrieved the cracked Archon Jonah had repaired in his cell. It was glowing, brighter than it should be possible for a damaged crystal. He fixed this, a maintenance worker said, holding it up, while he was imprisoned, while he was waiting to die. He fixed something broken, made it beautiful again. That's what humans do. They see what needs healing and they try, even when it costs them everything. Elindra stirred in Jonah's arms, consciousness returning slightly. She looked up at the crowd, at the evidence of his character manifesting in dozens of voices, and felt something shift inside her. The lumina, sensing truth, sensing genuine connection, began to pulse weakly. "They're right," she said, voice gaining strength. "I've been queen for 7 years. 7 years of advisors and nobility and council members. And in all that time, exactly one person looked at me like I was human. Like I was more than my crown or my failures. One person offered me stories instead of solutions, company instead of strategy, kindness instead of judgment." She touched Jonah's face. It was the janitor, the one we called worthless. The island shuddered again, a deep groan of metal and crystal. The backup Archons were failing. "We're out of time," Vex said, and for the first time he sounded defeated rather than calculating. "Your Majesty, if you can reactivate the Lumina, do it now. I'll accept whatever consequences come after. Just save them. Please." Elindra looked at Jonah. "Together?" "Together." She stood shakily, supported by his arm. The crowd fell silent. The ocean blooms, which had been fading, suddenly pulsed brighter, as if sensing what was coming. "I need everyone to hear me," Elindra called out, her queen's voice carrying across the tilted square. "You called him worthless. You called him a thief. You called him dangerous. But the only danger Jonah Merrick presents is to our comfortable lies. He shows us what we've been missing: partnership, humility, the strength to need each other." She took Jonah's hand, and where they touched, faint silvery light began to glow. "His name is Jonah Merrick, and he is the emotional anchor this power has been waiting 400 years to find." The Lumina stirred, hesitant, testing. "Say it with me," Elindra urged the crowd. "All of you. Show the Lumina that we accept this truth, that we're ready to change." Silence, fear, uncertainty. Then Marcus's voice rang out, "Jonah Merrick." The other humans joined. "Jonah Merrick." Kale signed it, his translator speaking. "Jonah Merrick." Slowly, one by one, Solmarians began to speak, some reluctantly, some with tears, some with relief at finally voicing what they'd been afraid to admit. Jonah Merrick. Jonah Merrick. Jonah Merrick. The names built into a chorus, hundreds of voices speaking in unison, and the Lumina responded. Not hesitantly now, but with joy, with recognition, with the relief of something broken finally being made whole. Light exploded from Elindra and Jonah, silver and brilliant, cascading outward in waves. The Archons across all of Velhara blazed to life, singing their harmony. The island stabilized, rising back to proper altitude, structures repairing themselves where the energy touched them. And Vex, standing at the edge of the platform, tried one last time to intervene. "This is wrong. This changes too much. We can't—" The section of platform he stood on cracked, destabilized by the earlier chaos. It broke away, and Counselor Vex fell with a scream toward the ocean far below. Jonah moved without thinking. He pulled away from Elindra, dove forward, caught Vex's hand at the last second. The older Solmarian dangled over empty air, eyes wide with shock. "I've got you," Jonah said, straining. "Someone help me pull him up." Hands grabbed them both. Marcus, Sarah, several Solmarian guards. They hauled both men back onto solid ground. Vex collapsed, shaking, staring at the human who'd just saved his life. "Why?" he gasped. "After everything I did." "Because that's what anchors do," Jonah said simply. "We hold on, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." The lumina pulsed brighter, approving, and the last of the damage across Velhara healed itself. In the ocean below, the Vanir blooms exploded into a galaxy of light, marking this moment, this change, this choice to finally bridge the gap that pride had created. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something that would change everything. The light from the initial activation faded, but everyone could feel it. Something fundamental had shifted. The lumina was awake, truly awake, for the first time in centuries. But it was still wounded, still incomplete, pulsing with uncertain rhythm. Aelindra felt it inside her, the power trying to stabilize but struggling. 400 years of separation couldn't be healed in a single moment, no matter how dramatic. The bond with Jonah was real, but it needed more. It needed acceptance. It needed transformation. She looked at the crowd, still stunned from nearly dying, from watching their world crack apart and barely be saved. They'd spoken Jonah's name, yes, but out of fear, out of desperation. That wasn't enough. "Follow me," she said to Jonah, and there was something in her voice that made everyone pay attention. She walked toward the center tower, the highest point in the square, the place where queens traditionally made proclamations. Her legs were steadier now, the light scars on her skin beginning to heal, but they still glowed faintly, visible proof of what she'd endured. Jonah followed, Marcus and the other humans close behind. Cale positioned himself with his equipment, understanding what was coming. When Aelindra began climbing the tower's spiral stairs, hundreds followed, compelled by something they couldn't name. At the top, wind whipping her silver hair, Aelindra stood before all of Velhara. The city spread below, thousands of faces turned upward. In the distance, other islands floated, their populations watching through broadcast screens as word spread of what had happened. 412 years ago, Aelindra's voice rang out, amplified by ancient acoustic crystals. Our ancestors made a choice. They looked at humans, saw how much the Lumina needed them, and felt diminished. Their pride couldn't accept that our most sacred power required partnership. So they erased humans from our history, buried the evidence, and told themselves they were stronger alone. She held up the ancient datapad, and Cale projected its contents into the air above the tower. Hundreds of records, scrolling past, proof undeniable. Every queen since has struggled, every generation has weakened, and we told ourselves it was natural decline, the price of age, anything but the truth. Her eyes swept the crowd. The truth is, we've been slowly dying because we chose isolation over interdependence. We chose comfortable lies over uncomfortable reality. Your Majesty, a voice called from the crowd. Not Vex, he was still shaken from his fall, but another counselor. Even if this is true, sharing power with humans means they have leverage over us. It makes us vulnerable. We're already vulnerable, Aelindra shot back. We've been vulnerable for centuries, just too proud to admit it. Do you think vulnerability is something to be ashamed of? Do you think needing each other makes us weak? She gestured to Jonah. This man saved Counselor Vex's life minutes ago, the same counselor who tried to execute him. Tell me, who showed strength in that moment? The one with power or the one with compassion? Silence answered her. You called him worthless, Aelindra continued, her voice breaking slightly. You called him invisible, a mistake, a burden, and he responded with kindness, with repair, with stories that helped someone sleep who hadn't slept in years. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever witnessed. The Lumina pulsed inside her, responding to the emotion in her words, but it still felt incomplete. Not enough. They needed more. Cale's hands moved frantically, signing to his equipment. Above the tower, the ancient records transformed. Instead of text, they became images. holographic recreations of the old partnership. Humans and Solmarians working together, the lumina flowing between them in patterns of shared light. Children of both species playing, artists collaborating, scientists discovering, all of it erased, all of it forgotten. And then the images showed what came after, the decline, queens collapsing, islands falling, civilizations fracturing, centuries of struggle that didn't have to happen. The crowd watched in stunned silence as their true history played out before them. Some wept, others looked angry, many just looked lost. "We can't change the past," Elindra said into that silence, "but we can choose differently now. We can accept that needing each other isn't weakness, that partnership isn't surrender, that humans aren't here to serve us, but to complete something we cannot complete alone." "And what about our pride?" the same counselor demanded. "What about our identity as Solmarians?" "Pride?" Elindra laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Our pride nearly killed us all today. Our pride has been killing us slowly for 400 years. I'm done with pride. I'm interested in survival, in truth, in building something better than what we've had." The counselor opened his mouth to argue, but the lumina inside Elindra suddenly flared with aggressive intensity. Not toward her, but toward him. The light expanded, visible to everyone, and it carried an emotion that everyone could feel: rejection, disgust. The power itself was repelling his arrogance. The counselor stumbled back, actually afraid, and in that moment everyone understood. The lumina Val wasn't just energy, it was conscious. It had opinions, and it was done with 400 years of being forced to serve arrogance. "The power itself chooses truth," Kyle signed, his translator speaking with awe. "It's rejecting the lies, rejecting the pride. It wants authenticity." Elindra felt the lumina surge inside her, demanding release, demanding full manifestation. But she knew it needed both of them, completely, unreservedly. She turned to Jonah. "Are you ready for this to be permanent? Once we complete the bond, you're tied to Somerith, to me, to this responsibility. Your life changes forever." Jonah thought about his sister on Earth, about the quiet life he'd planned. Then he looked at Elindra, at the hope and fear in her eyes, at the thousands of people below who needed this to work. "I stopped being just me the moment I said my name in that chamber," he said. "Might as well make it count for something." Elindra smiled, tears streaming down her face. She held out her hand. Jonah took it, and this time, when they connected, they held nothing back. Every fear, every hope, every dream and trauma and moment of joy. The lumina drank it in, fed on the emotional honesty, grew strong on the truth of their connection. Elindra began to glow, brighter than any queen in recorded history. But so did Jonah, his human body channeling power it was never designed to hold. It should have destroyed him. Would have destroyed him if Elindra hadn't made a choice. She reached deep inside herself, found her life force, her very essence, and fed it into the bond, not sacrificing herself, but sharing herself, giving him the strength to survive what they were about to do. The light scars on her skin blazed brilliant white as she used them as channels, turning her wounds into sources of power. Pain transformed into purpose. "Jonah Merrick!" she screamed to the sky, to the universe, to whatever force had created the lumina in the first place, and the universe answered. The archons across every island in the entire archipelago exploded with light. Not just Velhara, but every floating city, every settlement, every inhabited space. They synchronized, harmonized, sang together in a frequency that made the air itself vibrate. The islands stopped falling forever. They locked into perfect altitude, stable, unshakable. The Vonner blooms in the ocean didn't just glow, they erupted bioluminescent explosions that spread across the entire world ocean, turning the water into a mirror of stars. And where Elindra and Jonah stood, hands clasped, something impossible happened. The lumina manifested physically. not as light inside her, but between them. A visible aurora, silver and gold and colors that didn't have names, spinning around them both like a living thing. It expanded, spread, covered the tower, the island, the planet. Everyone on Somerith could feel it. The sensation of something broken finally being healed, of something that should always have been this way, finally becoming what it was meant to be. Jonah fell to his knees, overwhelmed. The power was too much, too bright, too everything. But Alindra fell with him, supporting him, their foreheads pressed together, breath shared. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got you. You're not alone." "Shh, neither are you," he gasped back. The aurora around them pulsed one final time, then settled, condensing back into something sustainable. The impossible brightness faded to a gentle, constant glow that existed around both of them, visible to anyone who looked. Proof of the bond, proof of the partnership, proof that the Lumina Vol had finally found its complete form. When they finally stood, hands still clasped, and turned to face the crowd, there was no more doubt. No more argument, no more pride-driven denial, because everyone had felt it. The rightness, the truth, the power that came not from domination, but from genuine partnership. Vex, standing at the base of the tower, looked up at them and did something he'd never done in his long political career. He bowed. Not the formal political bow, a real one. Acknowledgement, respect, apology. One by one, the entire crowd followed. Thousands of Solmarians bowing to their queen and to the human janitor who'd saved them all. Marcus Chen was crying, Sarah was laughing, Kyle was signing rapid prayers of gratitude. And as the sun set over Solmerith, painting the sky in colors that matched the aurora around Alindra and Jonah, a new age began. One where worth wasn't determined by species or status, where strength meant being vulnerable enough to need each other, where the janitor and the queen stood equal, bound by a power that had always known they were meant to find each other. But the night wasn't over yet. There was still one more revelation to come. The council chambers had never seen such a dramatic restructuring. Within 3 days of what was now being called the Awakening, half the traditional seats had been replaced. Vex, to everyone's surprise, had not been executed or exiled. He'd asked for demotion, voluntarily stepping down to a minor administrative role. "I nearly destroyed everything, because I couldn't let go of how things were supposed to be," he told Alindra privately. "Let someone wiser take my place." That someone turned out to be Kale. The deaf record keeper who'd risked everything to reveal the truth became chief counselor, his signs translated by technology that the council finally bothered to implement properly. 4 human representatives joined the council, Marcus Chen among them, though he'd initially protested. "I'm an engineer, not a politician," he'd argued. "Good," Alindra had replied. "We've had enough politicians." The reforms came swiftly. Humans gained full citizenship, equal rights, protection under law. The historical records were made public, taught in schools, displayed in museums. The 400 years of erasure became a cautionary tale, what happens when pride matters more than truth. But the most profound change was the quietest one. In the week following the awakening, Jonah discovered he could do what Alindra had always done, call the Lumina, not by his own name but by hers. He'd been alone in the chamber, studying the archons, trying to understand the power that now lived partly in him. Alindra was in meetings, exhausted from negotiations with neighboring islands, and Jonah had felt her weariness through their bond. Without thinking, he'd whispered, "Alindra Valmerin." The Lumina had responded, not pulling from her, but generating from him through their connection. The power flowed, strengthened her from a distance, gave her a second wind she desperately needed. She'd burst into the chamber an hour later, eyes wide. "Did you just—" "I didn't mean to," Jonah had said quickly. "I just wanted to help, and it happened." She'd kissed him, right there, in the sacred chamber, in full view of scandalized guards. When she pulled back, she was grinning. "Do you understand what this means? The power goes both ways. We can support each other. Neither of us has to carry it alone." That was the moment Jonah realized this wasn't just duty or destiny. This was partnership. Real partnership. And maybe, possibly, something more. 6 months later, Jonah stood in the royal gardens, carving another miniature. This one was larger, more detailed. Velhara, as it looked now, with human and Solmerian architecture blended. The plaza where the awakening happened, marked with a crystal monument. "Still carving, I see." He looked up to find Alindra approaching, her attendants deliberately hanging back to give them privacy. She'd changed since that day. Still regal, still powerful, but lighter somehow. Like someone had lifted a weight she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. "Old habits," Jonah said, showing her the miniature. "Thought it might look good in the museum, next to the historical displays." "It's perfect." She sat beside him on the bench, close enough that their shoulders touched. The aurora that surrounded them both pulsed gently at the contact, visible in the fading evening light. "I got a message from your sister today." Jonah's head snapped up. "Riley? Is she okay?" "She's fine. Graduating with honors, actually, thanks to the scholarship funds we've been sending." Alindra smiled. "She also says, and I quote, 'Tell my brother to stop being a workaholic and actually enjoy being a magical alien-bonded superhero, because that's the coolest thing ever, and he better not waste it on humility.'" Jonah laughed. "That sounds like her." She also asked if she could visit Solmarith. "Study here. Apparently, we're becoming known for our xenobiology programs now that we're actually working with other species instead of just tolerating them." "What did you tell her?" "That her brother has guest quarters in the palace and she's welcome any time." Alindra paused, assuming he plans to stay. Jonah set down his carving, turned to face her fully. "Where else would I go? Earth, home, a normal life, where you're not bound to an alien queen and an ancient power that will need you for the rest of your life." She tried to sound light, but he heard the fear underneath, the fear that he'd realize what he'd given up and resent her for it. "Alindra," he said gently, and the lumina pulsed at her name from his lips. "I've sent more credits back to Earth in 6 months than I could have in 10 years of janitorial work. Riley's getting her dream education. My parents' debt is paid off. Everyone I love back home is taken care of. And here?" He gestured around them. "Here I get to help heal a civilization, work alongside people who've stopped seeing me as invisible, wake up every day and do something that matters. Why would I leave?" "Because it's hard," she said quietly. "The bond is permanent. Every emotion I feel, you'll feel echoes of. Every crisis, every responsibility, you'll share. And people will always see you through the lens of us. The human who saved the alien queen, the anchor who changed everything. You'll never just be Jonah again." "I never wanted to be just Jonah," he said. "Just Jonah was invisible. Just Jonah was worthless. This Jonah?" He took her hand, felt the lumina sing between them. "This Jonah matters. This Jonah has purpose. This Jonah gets to stand next to someone extraordinary and help her change the world. That's not a burden. That's a gift." Alindra's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You really mean that?" "Every word," he smiled. "Besides, someone has to make sure you sleep occasionally and tell you terrible Earth jokes and remind you that queens are people too." She laughed through her tears, leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat like that as the sun set, the aurora around them pulsing in gentle rhythm with their shared breath. In the plaza below, humans and Solmerians worked together on the new monument. The cracked Archon Jonah had repaired sat at its center, a symbol of beauty and imperfection, of worth found in unexpected places. Kale was training a new generation of record keepers, teaching them to look for the stories that had been erased, to question official narratives, to value truth over comfort. Marcus Chen and his team were designing new residential areas where humans and Solmerians would live as neighbors, not as different classes. Vex had started a school. An actual school where he taught young Solmarians about the cost of pride, using his own failures as cautionary tales. It was, by all accounts, the most popular class in the city, and across the oceans, the Vanir blooms continued to glow every night, spreading further each month as the bond between Alindra and Jonah grew stronger. Some scientists theorized that eventually, the blooms would cover the entire planet, marking Solmarith forever as a place where two species chose partnership over pride. "Your Majesty," an attendant called softly, "the evening council session begins in an hour." Alindra sighed. "Duty calls." "Want company?" Jonah asked. "Always." She stood, pulling him up with her. Though fair warning, tonight's agenda includes trade negotiations with 3 different systems. It's going to be incredibly boring. "I'll bring my carving tools. Multitask." He pocketed the miniature Velhara. "Besides, boring together is still better than interesting alone." As they walked back toward the palace, the aurora flowing between them like a visible promise, Alindra thought about how far they'd come. 6 months ago, she'd been a failing queen, slowly dying from carrying a power that rejected her isolation. Jonah had been invisible, worthless, a janitor who cleaned floors no one noticed. Now they were partners, anchors for each other, living proof that worth isn't determined by where you start, but by what you choose to become. That night, as the council met and decisions were made that would shape Solmarith's future, Jonah sat beside Alindra in a seat that had been added specifically for him, not as decoration, not as symbol, but as equal partner in the work of building something better. And when a particularly difficult negotiation threatened to collapse, when tempers flared and old prejudices surfaced, Jonah did something simple. He told a story about a place called Earth, where people were messy and flawed and brilliant and broken, and how they kept choosing to try anyway. About his mother, who'd said the universe was big enough for everyone to matter. About how the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways no one expected. The room quieted, tempers cooled. The negotiation resumed, this time with more grace. Later, as they walked through corridors Jonah had once cleaned, Alindra asked, "How do you do that? Calm entire rooms with just words?" "I don't," Jonah said. "They calm themselves. I just remind them why it's worth trying." She stopped walking, turned to face him. "I love you," she said suddenly. "I know it's complicated and probably politically inadvisable, and definitely not in any royal protocol. But I love you. The human janitor who became my anchor and my partner and my friend. I love you." Jonah's smile was bright enough to rival the lumina. "I love you too. The alien queen who saw me when everyone else looked through me, who chose truth over lies even when truth was harder. Who's the strongest person I've ever met?" He pulled her closer. "Also, politically inadvisable is kind of our specialty at this point." They kissed, there in the corridor as the lumina pulsed with joy and the archons throughout the palace sang their approval. Somewhere on Earth, Riley Merrick received a message from her brother. A picture of him and Alindra surrounded by light, with a caption that read, "Turns out being worthless was the best thing that ever happened to me. Come visit. You're going to love it here." Somewhere in the archives, future historians would record this moment as the beginning of Solmarith's golden age, when partnership replaced hierarchy and two species learned to see each other as equals. But in the corridor, in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was two people who'd found each other across impossible odds, who'd chosen to hold on when letting go would have been easier, who'd transformed each other's weaknesses into shared strength. What mattered was that the human everyone called worthless had saved a world by accepting that his worth wasn't something he needed to prove. It was something that had always existed, waiting for someone willing to see it. And what mattered was that Solmarith, floating in its ocean of stars, glowed brighter than it had in 400 years. Not because of power, but because of a janitor who'd said his name and a queen who'd had the courage to listen. The universe was indeed big enough for everyone to matter. Jonah and Alindra were living proof. And their story, The one that started with a janitor tripping over a tile and ended with a planet transformed was far from over. Because the best stories never really end. They just begin again. In the end, Jonah and Elindra learned a truth most civilizations spend millennia avoiding. That strength doesn't come from standing alone, but from choosing, again and again, to be shaped by the people we let close enough to change us. Maybe the real miracle wasn't the Lumina awakening, but a janitor and a queen discovering that even across species, status, and star systems, the universe bends a little brighter when two unlikely lives decide to share the same gravity. So now I leave this story in your hands. What part of yourself still waits for someone brave enough to see it? If your world began to fall, who would you reach for? And who would reach for you? And maybe the hardest question of all, in a society built on pride, would you be willing to be the first to kneel, just so everyone else could finally stand? If you stayed until this very last heartbeat of the tale, type Encore Light in the comments so I know you were here with us at the edge of the fall. And the rebirth. Tell me your city, your corner of the universe, so we can map where this little human alien miracle traveled. And if this story moved you, join our strange interstellar community. Subscribe, like, hype it in the comments. Share with someone who needs a reminder that worth can come from anywhere. And don't miss the next video waiting for you in the final card, because the cosmos has more stories and we're just getting started.